Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Peter Erasmus from Lifestyle Brokers number 1. It is an absolute pleasure and honor to host you this morning for our second Lifestyle Brokers webinar, but our very first with Nautical Underwriting Managers. We believe that you will find this session insightful and that it will greatly assist your business and how you do business from a risk management perspective. So just some housekeeping before we get started. Please respect the chat bar. Make use of the Q&A section for any questions that you might have, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to take an opportunity now to introduce our speaker for this morning, Selina Seprinic from Nautical Underwriting Managers. Selina has been in the insurance industry for the past 13 years and have worked for Etana Specialist Liabilities from 2008. They were then taken over by Hollard Marine, and she stayed on until 2017. She then went on to work at Universal Marine, who was a Lloyd's cover holder, until 2020, where after she joined Nautical Underwriting Managers. Her education spans over a decade and continuing. She studied towards medicine. She can perform basic life support and first aid. She's obtained a regulatory exam and short-term insurance accreditation. She then joined the Insurance Institute of South Africa and started furthering her insurance knowledge and has completed her NQF associateship through a higher certificate in short-term insurance. With 13 years of experience and a vast amount of knowledge in the industry, I'm comfortable to say that Selina is an expert in her field, and I'm very excited to hear what she has to share with us today. Selina, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. Hello, welcome, Sunny Banani, Dumelang, and that's about all I can do from my language skill side. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to all of our transporters, warehousemen, brokers, clients, whoever you are. Thank you for joining. Like Peter said, you could post any questions that you have in the chat, and we are more than happy to answer your questions. Plus, I'm also happy to answer any questions as we go along. I really am. So throughout this presentation, what we're going to be doing is discussing cargo insurance, and that's the main reason that I'm here, because I am a cargo insurance underwriter, or a cargo insurance insurer, rather. And in cargo insurance, I think a very big question is, whose responsibility is it to insure our cargo? Is it our transporter's responsibility? Is it our cargo owner's responsibility? We're going to look into this a little deeper today, and I hope that I will add value to you. So transporters are held liable for loss or damage to cargo due to their gross negligence. And in addition to gross negligence, obviously a transporter can be held liable contractually, and that's when they contract into liability. A transporter can also contract out of liability, but when they contract into liability or out of liability, it's normally stated in some documents. So the standard trading terms and conditions, the waybill, a delivery note, your SLAs or service level agreements, something called the Memorandum of Understanding, as well as a load confirmation. So those are some documents that would normally state whether a transporter contracts into liability or out of liability. Now let's briefly look at a cargo owner. So cargo owners, they're not transporting the cargo as such because they are appointing a transporter generally. But cargo owners have full, what we call insurable interest. They have full interest in the cargo because they actually physically own the cargo. They have taken physical money in some form and purchased the cargo. And therefore, if something happens to the cargo and the cargo is lost or damaged in some way or even stolen, it is in the cargo owner's best interest that they are reimbursed. So today we're going to look at transporters, cargo owners. We're going to look at a claim scenario, and we're going to just look at some interesting stats, which I really do hope that adds value to you. Let's go on to the next slide, which actually is Sure. So for humanity, it's arrive alive. And for cargo, it's arrive. And that's just my slogan. And the funny thing is if cargo doesn't arrive, it's usually a total loss. So if your load limit was, let's say, 2 million rand, and if the cargo didn't arrive, chances are insurers have to pay the 2 million rand less the excess or deductible, first amount payable. So we generally like it when the cargo actually arrives at its intended location. It just allows us some breathing space, and it just means that generally the loss isn't so big, so it's not a total loss. On the side of your screen, you'll find I've placed some stats which I thought was interesting in respect of theft of cargo when we compare 2019 with 2020. So just for knowledge's sake, generally theft of cargo from trucks is always at its highest. And the main reason for that is because it's involved in transportation where truck drivers are normally alone. For a large part of the voyage, truck drivers or drivers in particular just have 2 drivers on a vehicle or 1. And so they're largely alone, left to their own devices, as much as there can be cameras and other tracking devices on a truck. So when we compare 2019 with 2020, we see that 93% of cargo theft took place within the trucking industry, and only 78% took place in 2020. So there was a big drop in respect of theft from trucks. But where we can see the increase is in pipeline and facility. And pipeline and facility actually relates generally to warehouses or production facilities, places like that. And we see now in 2020, there's a big increase in theft in respect of those areas, almost like 100% increase in the facility losses, theft at storage. So the question is, well, what could have increased this theft at storage? And one of my conclusions is COVID. Because COVID created restriction in terms of transportation, it also allowed more cargo to be stored in warehouses. There were more overflowed facilities within warehouses. Stock was obviously overflowed, larger capacities, because cargo wasn't able to be transported smoothly and efficiently as we would have wanted to, which allowed perpetrators to dabble in theft in respect of these storage facilities as well as pipelines. So in addition to these stats, on the side, I'd just like to add that in addition to this, as much as there's been theft, there's also been a huge spike of cargo losses within the entire industry due to insufficient in-packing, which could be related to reduction in employees, a skeleton staff at work. All of that could have actually related to insufficiency in packing, where there was just a few people employed rather than the normal staff count. Okay. Now we're going to go on to the next slide, which I personally love. And it's did you knows. I always like, did you know this? Did you know that? Did you know this? So cargo theft in respect of trucks, we know that it's obviously generally at its highest, but in respect of perishable cargo theft, it's at its utmost highest because perishable cargo is generally what is needed throughout the market. It is needed in Africa. It is needed in South Africa. Can you imagine baby formula being stolen? And if baby formula is stolen, we all know it can be very easily disposed of, because not that I have any babies, but I would rather pay 50 rand for a huge bottle of or huge tin of baby formula instead of 500 rand. So as I've just mentioned, perishable cargo, it's at its highest theft. Can you even imagine what Omo, Sunlight, Liquid, those types of perishable cargo? It doesn't last it doesn't have an expiry date of a few months. It now has an expiry date of a few years. So perpetrators who dabble in these sorts of theft could steal cargo and store them in warehouses and easily sell them very slowly. As you can see in the slide, I've said that losses from warehouses and other storage facilities increases to 25%. More or less, that is the increase within South Africa. But did you know that 48% of reported thefts in Europe are said to be from warehouses, production facilities in 2020? Can you possibly imagine? That's like way more than South Africa. Then, in addition to this, what South Africa experienced is there's a new high value to goods such as PPE, face masks, antibacterial gel, and now the vaccine. So the vaccines, face masks, PPE, antibacterial gel, those kind of commodities are now under huge threat in respect of its supply chain. Okay, and not only did these high value commodities, it's not under threat as in fire and that kind of thing, but it's really under threat from a theft perspective, because there's bottlenecks within the logistics chain. Transporters are trying to transport as much cargo as possible, but within reason. We all know that in April 2020, there was huge bottlenecks within the borders. Some transporters took about 3 weeks to actually pass through a border. And this bottleneck allowed perpetrators to dabble in theft from these vehicles. Now we're going to look at a real life example in our next slide. And for the purpose of Poppy, I'm going to make it very clear that I am using fictitious names, and yeah, nothing is the real people. So please, even if the scenario looks real, it is really not real. Even if your friend had a similar loss, I promise it is not him or her. So as you can see here, we have a cargo owner and he is chopping wood. That should relate to more or less the type of cargo that we're looking at. The type of cargo is timber. So our cargo owner is purchasing timber. And that's our cargo owner. He appoints a transporter who's called our first transporter to transport cargo from a warehouse to Durban Port. Okay, so I've got the cargo owner on the slide, the first transporter who gets the opportunity to transport cargo from the warehouse keeper to Durban Port. Okay, the cargo owner tells the transporter, Mr. Transporter, please can you transport timber from the warehouse to Durban Port, and I will pay you a fee of 20,000 Rand. The first transporter is super excited about this business because it's been COVID and he hasn't been allowed to transport much cargo. So he accepts the business, forgetting that he's got other business in the pipeline. We're going to now move on to our next slide. So he accepts the business, only to realize he doesn't have capacity to transport cargo. So the first transporter does something most of us are familiar with. He appoints a subcontractor. And he gives the load of transporting the timber from the warehouse to Durban Port to a subcontractor. Okay. When the subcontractor goes to the warehouse to transport the timber from the warehouse to Durban Port, the warehouse keeper notifies the subcontractor that the cargo has already been loaded onto a vehicle with similar registration numbers and a similar make and model. The subcontractor is very confused, so he contacts the transporter and states that someone else has collected the cargo. The transporter is very confused, so now he calls the cargo owner. Mr. Cargo owner, did you get another transporter to transport the timber from the warehouse to Durban Port? And the cargo owner states no. After a few hours of investigation, it's concluded that the subcontractor's vehicle was cloned by perpetrators. The cargo is nowhere to be found. And my question to you, ladies and gentlemen, is who is now responsible for this loss of cargo? Is it the cargo owner, the transporter, subcontractor, or warehouse keeper? I'll repeat. Who is liable for the loss of cargo? Is it the cargo owner, transporter, subcontractor, or warehouse keeper? Let's go to our next slide. I would think this is our take. So, in a nutshell, let's look at the circumstances of the events. Now, when we put money to it, I think everybody's eyes are wide open, including mine. The entire load value, the entire value of the timber was 2 million rand. So the cargo owner who paid this 2 million rand, which was the value of the cargo, is out 2 million rand plus the 20,000 rand that he spent on freight costs, which he gave to the first transporter, plus the 350,000 rand potential profit he would have made should the cargo have been delivered to Durban Port. That is a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen. The total loss to the cargo owner is now sitting at 2,370,000 rand. Okay. The subcontractor that was requested to transport the cargo by the first transporter has not yet been paid for the cargo. Okay. Because he didn't actually collect the cargo. Just remember that. And the insured could be actually our cargo owner or our transporter, right? So now in this whole scenario, we have a cargo owner who actually lost his cargo, right? We have the first transporter who subcontracted the cargo to the subcontractor. The subcontractor hasn't been paid, but the first transporter has been paid, right? Let's first start with the warehouse keeper. The warehouse keeper, he is not responsible for the loss of the cargo unless the loss of the cargo was due to his gross negligence or some sort of negligence can be proven on his side. When the warehouse keeper gave the cargo to the cloned vehicle, he checked all the documents and everything looked legit. So he wasn't grossly negligent, so therefore cannot be responsible for the cargo. Now let's look at the subcontractor, the guy who actually went to the warehouse to fetch the cargo and it wasn't there. The subcontractor cannot be held responsible for the cargo because the cargo was never in his care, it was never in his custody, and it was never in his control. Okay, so unless the subcontractor can be proven, or unless the subcontractor in some way gross negligence can be proven, that's the only time he'd be held liable. Okay, he's not going to be held liable if gross negligence on his part cannot be proven. Now let's look at the first transporter. The first transporter is not responsible for the cargo either because it was never in his care, never in his custody, and never in his control. unless gross negligence on his side can be proven as well, which caused the loss. Which brings us to our cargo owner. He is responsible for the cargo because he has actual insurable interest. Did he cause the loss? No, by all means he didn't. But he is still responsible for the cargo because, like I said, he's got insurable interest for the cargo. And a loss of the cargo is going to cause a physical financial loss to him. And that's really the sole purpose of insurance, is actually indemnification, preventing a financial loss. So the cargo, in this particular case, in this particular claim scenario, the cargo owner's insurance policy will need to respond to the claim, and it will be seen as a theft, provided that the cargo owner actually did have an insurance policy in place. So just a side note, all parties, the cargo owner, the first subcontractor, or the first transporter, the subcontractor, as well as the warehouse keeper, they all needed insurance, right? But in this particular case, only the cargo owner's insurance policy will respond. If the cargo owner did not have an insurance policy, he would not be indemnified for his loss because no other policy would respond unless one party was proved to have been grossly negligent. I would just like to add here, this is another reason why all parties need to have insurance, and why I don't see cargo owners, transporters, subcontractors, and warehouse keepers. I don't see it as dual insurance. I actually see it as an importance in insurance and a very important strategy in ensuring that you mitigate losses. So on the bright side, right, because it's always better to look at life on the bright side. Everything looks better on the brighter side. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to go to the next slide. Right. So how do we stay ahead of these risks or losses? And what are the risk mitigation techniques so that organizations like you can be more sustainable and pay very little premium? I'm just joking, but I mean it from a sustainability perspective. It's really about security and awareness and proactive risk management, as well as preventative measures, which we all can take as an industry to build a very secure transport industry, right? So one of the things, I think, stuff that you're all very, very familiar with is tracking devices. Tracking devices, I would highly recommend, be 24 hours, 7 days per week, and be active and live. It's important to always check that if we have subcontractors on our panel or transporters or whoever you are in the industry, that these tracking devices and tracking monthly prescriptions are always up to date and paid. Stock taking, as often as possible from a warehouse keeper's perspective, is extremely important because a large percentage of losses actually take place when stock taking is not done often, and it leaves open doors for mysterious disappearance and unexplained losses. From a transporter's perspective, vetting of your drivers is crucially important. It is so important to vet your drivers before employment. What we have noticed is that full-time drivers that are full-time employed, are less likely to be involved in a driver fidelity type of loss than part-time or non-permanent drivers. Another thing of staying ahead of losses is correctly packing cargo. Some cargo needs to be lashed, some cargo needs to be further lashed and strapped, some cargoes need to be palletized and shrink wrapped. Whatever the way, whatever the means, it is crucially important for cargo to be correctly, adequately packed to withstand the entire duration of whichever voyage, be it road, air, rail, sea. Another thing I would like to mention regarding warehouse keepers is adhering to stacking heights. That's very important. And storing cargo on pallets. It just prevents losses due to water ingress when water ingress does come and when we have our heavy storms. I hope this helps you, and I hope I haven't gone too fast. But on a side note, just to add a lighter version, because I like looking at stats, I think it always just builds things and puts things into perspective. Some of the top stolen commodities were fuel, and I can understand why, because a lot of people need it, especially with generators. So it's not just fuel stolen for the transport industry and for transportation, but it's also now used in generators. Then electronics, which I think we all know about, white goods, but electronics could also be cell phones. Did you know that a cell phone, well, you probably all know the value of cell phones, but some cell phones are like 25,000 Rand, 30,000 Rand, 40,000 Rand, and basically everything can be done on a cell phone. So you don't really need a laptop or a computer. You don't really need something big. A small device such as a cell phone can be packaged and stolen, which is worth 40,000 Rand. So you can also imagine how easily and how quickly it is to dispose of all of this cargo. Pharmaceuticals, what we have experienced is if stolen, it's normally a total loss because stolen pharmaceuticals will not be likely to be used within the pharmaceutical industry. And that's really, it's not that we ensure fear of loss, but contamination can occur on all levels. So the theft of pharmaceuticals, even though it's not very high, it's fairly low, it's normally a total loss. And then medical supplies, well, usually, you know, syringes and medical masks that didn't come in as a previous high-risk threat, but since COVID, it has been increasing rapidly, and it's likely to keep increasing and not decreasing over the next few years. So I'm going to end and stop talking and not bore anybody. I hope I haven't bored you. Let's go on to the next slide, which is actually any questions which you may have, and I hope I can answer all of your questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Selina. So in essence, we had some technical issues. So I don't know if people joined in halfway and were from the start, so apologies for that. But if there are any questions, there's a Q&A function on your chat function. If you can type your questions there for Selina, anything to do with liability and cargo insurance, that would be awesome. So just from my side, Selina, I want to find out, do all transporters have standard trading terms and conditions in place?
No. Ultimately, it would be awesome if, yes, all transporters did have standard trading terms and conditions in place, but a lot of them don't, which does add complexity in the event of a loss. The purpose of standard trading terms and conditions is to minimize uncertainty between who's responsible for the cargo. But in respect of the law, common law doesn't really require you to have standard trading terms and conditions, because as long as the cargo is in your care, custody, and control, you can also be held responsible for it. But ideally, I speak on behalf of the industry as itself, and I think all insurers would love to work with standard trading terms and conditions.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then something that gets asked in all types of insurances, but so how does the cargo get valuated? So for what sum insured do you cover it? How do you determine that? How do the insurers see it, especially when we're looking at second-hand goods as well?
That's a good question, Peter. Second-hand goods. And second-hand goods is normally our famous household goods and personal effects, which is used. So in terms of used cargo, let's just look first at machinery, because that's not related to household goods and personal effects. Machinery, normally it will be new replacement value if it's lower than 5 years old. And then if it's older than 5 years old, it would be second-hand market replacement value or market replacement value. But at the same time, if an insured wants to insure their cargo at new replacement value, even though let's say it's 10 years old, it's not something that we cannot do. It's just something that we'd possibly ask more questions on or provide limited cover on. But most insurers can insure all types of cargo at a premium. In respect of household goods and personal effects, that's obviously used cargo, and that normally is insured for second-hand market replacement value or replacement value. I think one thing to note from an electronics perspective when we're insuring household goods is you may pay 35,000 Rand for a TV in 2005. But in 2010, that TV that you paid 35,000 Rand for is now brand new selling at 5,000 Rand. So it's something to just be mindful of from a household goods and personal effects place, that even though you paid 35,000 Rand for it, we could replace it at, let's say, 5,000 Rand.
Okay. While we're on household goods, so what type of cover do we offer, and like what's the widest cover that's possible?
I like to laugh at that question and cringe at the same time, because in my experience, the first policy that I ever wrote, which was the first policy for cargo in respect of household goods and personal effects, was 13 million Rand worth of household goods and personal effects going to Brazil. And it was a total loss. So it's not my favorite type of business. But in terms of cover, it's probably we could offer many types of cover. Everything, like I say, is at a premium and at an excess or at an deductible. If we insure cover household goods and personal effects for the widest cover, we would probably generally exclude scratching, chipping, denting, bending, twisting, rust, oxidation, discoloration, unless it's caused by an insured peril. So obviously, if you use a couch or a dining room chair, there's going to be scratches, chips, dents, etc. But unless you can prove to us that that scratch or that chip is as a result of, let's say, loading or offloading or the vehicle being in an accident, it's something that we'll pay for. Does that answer the question, Peter?
Yes, thank you very much. So there's another question from one of our attendees. Can you give us any insight in how using electronic documentation in container shipments are dealt with from a liability coverage perspective? Can I discharge cargo using an electronic bill of lading while still having liability coverage?
Sure. I think before I answer that question, I think it's important that, Peter, we perhaps remember who is asking this question. Is he a cargo owner? There's just so much more to the question, and I'm happy to answer this offline because there's so much of details regarding it. Who is asking this question? Is it the transporter? Is it the freight forwarder? Is it the cargo owner?
So let's assume it is a transporter in this instance, if I would assume correctly.
Okay, and he's got his bill of lading. He's got the bill of lading.
Yeah, so the first part of the question is in respect of electronic documentation in container shipments, how are they dealt with from a liability perspective? So can the transporter discharge cargo using an electronic bill of lading while still having liability coverage?
He can. I haven't seen an electronic bill of lading where they would allow, with liability cover, with still having liability cover, but it all depends on the shipping line. Whatever that particular shipping line is happy with.
100%. So it will be dealt with on a case-by-case scenario, I would assume.
Definitely. And a lot of insurance and a lot of what used to happen before COVID and what is happening now whilst in COVID has actually been transformed to make life a lot more easier. So electronics is something that is electronic documentation is a good thing, but it obviously needs to come with proof of other documentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Then just for everyone here, do we cover just South Africa? Do we cover worldwide? And can we take on insured outside of South Africa?
Okay, so I hope I'm going to be answering this question well enough. In respect of cargo, we can insure cargo in South Africa, outside of South Africa, and worldwide. But the question is, who is the cargo owner? So there is a lot of laws and legislation in place regarding African countries. There are some African countries who state that insurance needs to be taken out in that particular country. Okay.
Yeah.
So in respect of that, for example, Zimbabwe has legislative laws in place where they want insurance to actually be taken out in Zimbabwe. So if our insured or whoever our insured is South African, we can definitely insure their cargo worldwide, including RSA.
Awesome. Thank you. There's no other questions from the group per se. I just want to find out as a bit of tip for everyone else, what is some tips that we can give everyone to mitigate their risks as best as possible?
Okay, that's an easy one, Peter.
I was hoping for something a bit more tricky.
Okay, no. I love this one because the more loss mitigation, the better and safer the entire industry. Everyone in the supply chain is safe by risk and loss mitigation. I'll start with a warehouse keeper. So a warehouse keeper, I would say, ensure that the cargo is stacked and adheres to stacking heights. Ensure that cargo is on pallets. If cargo needs to be shrink wrap the cargo. It just helps. For example, if there's a forklift driver and he is trying to lift a pallet and that entire pallet is shrink wrapped, it just prevents small packages from being dropped. So it just prevents further losses. From a transporter's perspective, I would say vet your drivers and vet them adequately and properly. Ensure that they have a nil criminal record. Ensure that they are paid on time. You don't want them to be wooed in the wrong direction. Ensure that you have tracking 24 hours, 7 days a week, active live tracking. Ensure that if you are transporting high-risk cargo, it is not stopping at a certain location for longer than, let's say, 2 hours. If it is a short trip, for example, from Durban to Johannesburg, it doesn't need an overnight stop. And if you are stopping overnight, ensure that it is a facility which has the correct security arrangements in place. From a cargo owner's perspective, ensure that you have the right and the correct adequate insurance cover available. and in place. Ensure that your premiums are paid. Ensure that your sums insured or your limits of liability are sufficient and covers you for the selling price of the cargo and not just the cost price of the cargo. Ensure that within the sum insured or your limit of liability, all hidden costs are included. You don't want, in the event of a loss, to be insufficiently or inadequately insured. Also, for cargo owners, you're at first place here. And I think ideally you would like your policies to respond first because you're the one who has the biggest insurable interest. And that's what I would say.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you very much, Selina. We appreciate your insights and information presented to us this morning. I don't have any further questions, and there are none that I can pick up. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So if you can give me a quick second.
Sure.
Let me just have a look. I think that's pretty much that. So yeah, thank you very much for chatting with us this morning. We really appreciate it. I just want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Again, apologies for the gremlins and technology and everything in between. This is my details. I've got a QR code there if you want to scan that and make use of getting in touch with me. We will be sending a recording through to you as soon as it's available. And from my side, thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you, Selina.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.